On to the next video. Now we shall talk about taxation and how to curb supply. So, you know how taxes are raised, right? Bare minimum. So you have the government. It declares percentage of insert thing here. Make that F more obvious. Is taxed. So, for example, let's say you have this poorly drawn apple here. This apple is worth $2 for the sake of ease. Expensive apple, but you know what, screw it. And the sales tax is 5%. So multiply by 0.5 and it comes out to 5 cents. This is then added to the total cost, and that's an 8, not a dollar sign, jeez. And this is what you pay. Now, given such a small example and a small tax, one may ask, why does this matter? It's like taking pennies on the dollar. Well, here's why it matters. Let's go a bit bigger. Let's say you want to buy $100 of definitely not that. There you go. You buy $100 of alcohol. Okay? But you have a sin tax of 20%. Well, suddenly you're paying $120. And this can be used to reduce supply. Because remember, taxes don't just have to be on sale, they can also be on production. So you can say, for example, each one of these produced costs an extra 15% in taxation. Doing this allows you to effectively reduce profit. And when you can reduce profit, you can also drive personal deficits. And thus, revenue goes down. So if you'll think about it in terms of supply and demand, let's say demand is here. Now, rarely is demand stagnant, but for the sake of this example, we'll make it easier. So demand's here, and what normally happens is supply goes to increase up to that point, if not beyond, usually stagnating around the point where demand and supply meet. With these taxes, you can reduce supply because demand is lowered. Say it's brought down to here, if that. And so, over time, you can effectively reduce supply constantly by bringing demand down, thus resulting in lower production and lower sales, thus reducing people's willingness to pay for these items and for people to produce the items to hopefully be bought from. This can allow you to reduce consumption of goods. Now, this is most commonly thought of with alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, basically illicit substances. But it can be used technically for anything. I mean, a tax on trees would have the same effect. It'd just be a bit harder to enforce. But you could theoretically do it with anything. You want less things consumed? Tax that thing to the point where it's pointless to even produce it. Then less people consume it, less demand exists for it, and the supply goes down further and further. I would, however, and this is important, highly recommend it only used for things you do not want consumed. And for me, that is obviously... Hold on a second. This will be my own moralism coming into play, so do understand that as it goes in. Recreational. Same thing. There is actually medicinal alcohol. Don't really care about it though. You can fill in what that is. These are things I 100% wish to reduce. And so I would advocate heavily for reducing them through taxation. Now, legalization is an interesting subject because here's the thing. When something is banned, it technically is regulated. The technicality is that it is not allowed in normal markets, and therefore it is regulated out of those areas, because if they're caught in those areas, then the business that starts them is either fined or has a person arrested, basically shutting it down. So that is a regulation. But in the black market, where a lot of the sales are going on, it is not regulated. And thus, the result is things get worse over time, because it's kind of hard to figure out black markets when the substance can be easily hidden. And so, black markets make a legalization basically impossible in terms of actually stamping out the issue. However, taxation works for a few reasons. One, and this is the obvious, it's easier to prove. It's one thing to prove that someone has a substance. It's another to prove that their business records had them paying the fee for selling that substance. Because think about it. When it comes to taxes, everything has a paper trail. It's a lot easier to keep track of that. It's one thing to just have a shipment that you don't log and just sail it over and then say, oh yeah, that money I made, that was totally from this other business. Totally. Absolutely wasn't, but we like to pretend. However, with taxes and a legal substance or item, it is a lot easier to prove because, one, it's unlikely that you're going to keep a separate log for the specific item because, well, it's legal. And two, it's a lot easier to prove tax fraud than it is possession of illicit substances. You just hire a forensic accountant. They can look through things and figure that out pretty quickly. If there are numbers that aren't adding up and it's clear that this is the result of fraud and not, just a person making a few mistakes while bean counting, then yeah, it's a lot easier to prove. And so, that is a lot easier way to regulate and restrain these items that you wish to get rid of. It is also worth noting, and this is important, taxes are far more likely to have the government actually care about them. Because think about it, the government likes its cash cows. The government's far more willing to send an agent to check to see if you're paying your taxes, because that's how it gets its revenue, than send it to check if you had a DUI or anything, because it doesn't care. Sure, the police on a local area might check, just in case. Or if you get a report, they'll do it for basic following of standard procedure. But the only one the government, especially the federal or state governments, will actively gun you for is taxes. because they need their taxes to run. Sure, maybe if we finally find a way to make the US run tax-free, that'd be great, but it's unlikely. At least without a dedicated plan. I mean, even mine, which is very restrictive, would still take 12 years at least. And so, you just generally need taxes to run, and thus the IRS and similar agencies for local levels have an inherent incentive to actually enforce the taxes. It's not only easier to track, but number two, they're also more likely to be tracked for the pure fact that the government likes its money. And there's the final fact of, technically, it's legal, so people who do use these things that you don't want them to, if it has any addictive properties, are more likely to seek treatment. And you can use the taxes generated from these illicit substances to start curing people of the disease that is infesting them called addiction, which is attaching them to it. And thus, you can make your population healthier, reduce consumption of bad things, while still allowing a permanent stigma forever associated with it. Taxes. They're very useful when it comes to strangling enterprise. Anyways, have a good day.